There are numbers, and then there are numbers that tell you something has fundamentally changed. This week, Newsweek published polling and web traffic data that qualifies as the second kind. Meghan's approval rating in America, her home country, the market her entire post-royal commercial identity was built around, dropped 13 points in 2 quarters. And the traffic to her as ever website has been falling in almost every month since January, with US visits nearly halving between December and April.
Popularity ratings for Meghan Markle in her home country of America are absolutely damning.
13 points in 2 quarters, nearly half the American web traffic in 4 months, in the only market the brand currently serves. Tonight, we are going through every number in that Newsweek analysis, what the web traffic data actually tells us about the health of the business behind the polished Instagram content and the People magazine coverage, and why the pattern around People magazine, which has quietly become its own observable story, matters to understanding why the polling is moving the way it is. Let's start with the YouGov polling, because the methodology matters, and because understanding how this system works is important for reading what the numbers actually show. YouGov runs a rolling approval system rather than traditional single-point polls. Instead of conducting one survey at a fixed point in time and publishing the result, responses are collected continuously throughout the year from a large sample of respondents and compiled into quarterly data sets. This means the results reflect sustained, accumulated public sentiment rather than a snapshot reaction to a single news event that might spike or drop a number before it normalizes. It is, as polling methodologies go, a more stable and reliable measure of how someone is genuinely tracking in public opinion over time, precisely because it is designed to smooth out the noise of individual moments and show the underlying trend.
Like, the most recent headline says, Meghan Markle's coastal kitchen has us eyeing rustic cake stands, floral plates, and more charming finds from $9. Now, can we just be honest about it? Because everyone knows their kitchen is gross, right? Like, I mean, I'm not a big kitchen guy, but there's a reason why Meghan never uses their own kitchen for her TV show or her photo shoots.
In the third quarter of 2025, Meghan was liked by 37% of respondents and disliked by 22%, giving her a net approval rating of +15 in America. That is a positive number. That is a meaningful base of public goodwill in the country she chose as the foundation for both her personal life and her entire commercial operation. For a British-connected public figure who had left a major institution, relocated to the most commercially saturated media market in the world, and was attempting to build a food brand and a lifestyle identity from scratch, a net +15 in American public opinion represented a genuine and valuable asset, something real and usable. Consumer sentiment translates directly into commercial behavior, and +15 was a number that gave the commercial operation something to build on. By the first quarter of 2026, that had shifted significantly, liked by 29%, disliked by 27%. Net approval, +2, a 13-point decline in net approval over 2 quarters in her home market, measured by a continuous rolling system designed specifically to filter out the noise of single-event spikes and drops.
To be ignored, and they just keep pumping out this manufactured nonsense. Like you said, it is just pure Sussex propaganda, and they are ignoring the truth that everybody can see.
To understand why that number is significant, consider what movements on this kind of rolling poll normally look like in practice. Someone who has a major film release, a significant charity moment, or a positive news cycle might gain 3 or 4 points temporarily. Someone caught in a genuine controversy might lose a similar amount before recovering. The rhythm is usually modest and cyclical. A 13-point net decline in 2 quarters is not that rhythm. It is sustained directional movement, not a stumble, but a slide. In any professional communications context, a movement of that scale and consistency would trigger an immediate strategic conversation about what is driving it and what needs to change. A 13-point drop does not fix itself by continuing the existing approach and waiting for the numbers to recover. It fixes itself, if it fixes itself at all, by understanding what drove it and addressing those factors directly, rather than continuing to generate volume while the underlying trend moves in the opposite direction. If Palace Insider is giving you the full picture that other channels skip, the like button is right there. It costs nothing, and it keeps this channel going. Now let's talk about the web traffic, because Newsweek's Jack Royston did something specific and useful here. He used similar web data to track monthly US visitors to the As Ever website, and the numbers he found directly parallel the polling decline. December 2025, 246,000 total visits to the site, of which 108,000 were from the United States. That US number is the one that matters commercially, because the United States is currently the only market As Ever ships to.
Like in the past, People magazine may have been able to say, oh, well, actually, the Brits don't like Meghan, but we have an audience that does like Meghan. Well, not if you look at the new figures that Jack Royston has revealed in Newsweek.
The brand does not have international distribution. It does not have export certification for other markets. Visits from Australia, the UK, Europe, or anywhere else represent curiosity traffic. People checking in on the story, watching a product video, reading what the brand has released. But they represent zero pathway to a sale. The commercially meaningful number is the American traffic. And in December, that number was 108,000. January 2026. Total visits rose to 268,000, a number that looks like growth if you only read the headline. But US visits fell to 89,000. Overall traffic was up because the website glitch that revealed the warehouse inventory numbers drove global interest and brought in visitors from everywhere. The visits that cannot generate revenue increased dramatically. The visits that can generate revenue decreased. The headline number and the commercially relevant number moved in opposite directions, and only one of them matters to the business. February, 213,000 total visits, about 83,500 from the US. Smaller in every direction, including the global traffic that had briefly inflated the January total. March, a slight recovery that briefly offered the possibility that the trend had found a floor. 226,000 total, approximately 94,000 from the US. Still below the January US figure. Still below 100,000 American visitors for the month. April, the number that removes any remaining ambiguity about the direction of travel. 178,000 total visits, just 61,500 from the US. From 108,000 American visitors in December to 61,500 in April, a decline of roughly 43% in the commercially meaningful traffic to the site across 4 months. Not a quarterly adjustment, not a seasonal pattern, a sustained directional fall, producing a new lower number almost every month, with one temporary recovery in March that did not hold into April and did not return the number to anything close to its December level. To put that in commercial terms, whatever volume of purchases 108,000 American monthly visitors was generating in December, the brand is now generating from 61,500. And even within those visitor numbers, the vast majority of visits will not result in purchases. Browse rates, comparison shopping, people arriving from social media to look at a product they heard mentioned rather than to buy. The actual conversion from visit to sale will be a fraction of the traffic figure. A 43% decline in traffic represents a more than 43% decline in the pool from which purchasers are drawn. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next. And drop your take on these specific numbers in the comments below. What does the April figure of 61,500 American visitors tell you about where the business is heading? Now, correlation is not causation, and it is worth being clear about that before going further. Royston states it explicitly in the piece, and he is right to include that caveat. A decline in approval ratings and a decline in website traffic happening at the same time does not mathematically prove that one caused the other. The two trends might both be symptoms of the same underlying shift in public interest and attention. Perhaps both are driven by the audience moving on rather than the commercial numbers driving the polling, or vice versa. That caveat is fair and should be stated clearly, but the shape of the correlation is worth sitting with for a moment. The polling decline and the traffic decline are not just happening simultaneously in a general sense. They are happening in the same direction, in the same market, in the same 6-month window, with a 13-point polling drop and a 43% commercial traffic drop arriving together rather than separately. Two independent measurement systems, one run by YouGov tracking public sentiment, one run by SimilarWeb tracking website behavior, arriving at structurally similar conclusions about the same subject in the same period. Whatever is driving the movement, it is showing up in both measures at the same time. That is the kind of dual confirmation that makes a trend more difficult to dismiss as noise. The natural question that follows is, what happened in this period to drive a 13-point polling drop and a 43% decline in American web traffic? There is not one single answer. The Newsweek analysis does not identify a single triggering event, and that is probably the accurate read. What appears to have happened is a compound effect from multiple developments arriving within a compressed period. The Netflix partnership restructured and then effectively ended in March 2026, removing the most significant corporate endorsement the brand had carried. When Netflix's chief content officer described As Ever products as consistently selling out in record time in August 2025, a public statement made to justify an investment extension, that characterization carried real commercial and reputational weight in the American consumer market. Netflix is a company with global brand credibility. Its chief content officer going on the record with a specific positive characterization of the brand's commercial performance is not a minor celebrity endorsement. It is a signal to the market about what a major company believes it is investing in. When Netflix exited the equity position 7 months later and distributed the remaining product internally to its own employees rather than retailing it through established channels, that endorsement was withdrawn publicly, visibly, and in a way that raised questions about what had changed between August and March. The Archewell Foundation's financial difficulties became part of the public record in the same period, including the California delinquency filing, the 3 unanswered letters from Charity Watch, and the reported $3 million annual deficit. A charity under regulatory scrutiny and a commercial brand are separate operations, but for an American consumer whose impression of Meghan is shaped by the overall picture of the Sussex household, these things do not arrive in separate compartments. The warehouse inventory numbers became public via the website Glitch in January, and the 8-week gap between the People magazine international expansion explanation in January and the spokesperson's no decisions have been made in March provided a visible and documented contradiction about the state of the business. One that circulated widely enough to reach audiences beyond the dedicated royal commentary community. The Geneva speech arrived 18 days before the birthday photographs in April, generating substantial coverage about the specific gap between the public position and the private action, and arriving precisely when the polling was already in decline. None of these things in isolation would necessarily move a YouGov rolling rating by 13 points. Together, within 6 months, in a market already showing signs of audience fatigue from the volume of Sussex content being produced and placed, they appear to have produced a cumulative effect that the polling data now reflects. This is not a single controversy that can be addressed with a single sympathetic magazine cover or a single positive Instagram moment. It is a pattern that has accumulated across enough time, in enough separate and independent datasets, to represent a settled shift in how a significant portion of the American public is relating to the Sussex story, rather than a temporary reaction that will normalize when the specific triggering event fades from coverage. Now let's talk about People magazine, because the context around that relationship has become its own story, and it is directly relevant to understanding why the polling numbers are moving the way they are. The volume of coverage People has devoted to the Sussexes in 2026 is, by any conventional journalistic measure, extraordinary. Not extraordinary in the sense of covering major news. Extraordinary in the sense of frequency and consistency for a subject who is not, by the standard metrics of celebrity journalism, generating the kind of news events that justify sustained feature coverage. Not major interviews in the traditional sense. Not award wins. Not new commercial projects at a scale that would normally warrant ongoing feature treatment. Instead, product launches, Instagram recaps, outfit analysis from a single public outing, kitchen aesthetic descriptions, lifestyle glimpses from carefully managed distances, and family references extracted from promotional videos. Over 100 pieces in the first months of 2026 alone, built around a small rotating set of framings. The devoted mother, the loving wife, the visionary entrepreneur, the misunderstood figure, the resilient success story. The framing does not shift. The subject rotates between those 5 positions while new products or recent appearances provide the surface-level variation that distinguishes one piece from the one published the week before. Identical narrative architecture, different headline, different product in the copy. The most commented example in recent weeks, People published a piece about the aesthetic appeal of Meghan's coastal kitchen, citing specific accessories visible in the cooking content set, as though it was responding to reader interest in replicating the look. The kitchen in question is documented to have been a hired property used for the show rather than the Sussex family home. People ran the piece treating it as the subject's actual domestic environment, not because they were unaware of the distinction, but because the piece was not primarily a piece of reporting about where Meghan Markle actually cooks. It was a product placement vehicle built around an image. This is the pattern that has become increasingly legible in 2026. Coverage that reads as originating from the subject's communications infrastructure rather than from editorial decisions about what is newsworthy. The signal is not any individual piece, which can always be explained in isolation as a reasonable editorial choice. The signal is the aggregate, the consistent volume, the absence of any critical framing, the recycling of identical narratives across weeks of continuous publication, and the appearance of defensive coverage in People specifically before potentially controversial Sussex moments land, as happened with the Geneva birthday photograph situation where supportive framing appeared in People before the photographs were posted. Whether the mechanism behind this pattern is a formal commercial arrangement, an informal relationship between the Sussex press operation and People's editorial environment, or simply a publication that has discovered a reliable traffic formula in Sussex lifestyle content and is running it without restraint, the observable result is the same. A major American publication functioning as a consistent and uncritical amplifier of a specific public image rather than as an independent voice covering a subject. The problem this creates for the operation that benefits from it is specific and somewhat ironic. People magazine coverage is commercially useful to the Sussex brand precisely as a trust mechanism. A respected third-party publication telling American consumers that the subject is doing well, is likable, is successfully building something. That mechanism works when readers perceive People as independent. When the volume and consistency of the coverage becomes visible enough to attract comment and analysis, as it demonstrably has in 2026, the trust mechanism degrades. The audience stops processing the coverage as independent reporting and starts processing it as managed messaging. And managed messaging from a known source is considerably less effective at building genuine consumer confidence than credible, independent, third-party endorsement. 100 positive articles from a publication perceived to be operating as a PR partner does considerably less work for public approval ratings than 10 positive articles from a publication perceived as genuinely independent and capable of scrutiny. The trust multiplier that makes third-party coverage commercially valuable to a brand only functions when the third party is perceived as genuinely third-party. The polling numbers, measured continuously by YouGov across the same period that People's Sussex volume has been at its highest, suggests that the diminishing returns on this approach are now showing up in the data rather than remaining a theoretical concern. Which brings us back to the polling numbers. A 13-point drop in net approval in America across 2 quarters, measured by a rolling system that filters out noise, at the same time as American web traffic to the As Ever site nearly halved. The People magazine volume did not prevent either of those things from happening. It may have masked them from inside the operation for longer than a different communication strategy would have allowed. Continuous positive coverage creates the impression of positive momentum even when the underlying data is moving in the opposite direction. But it did not stop the movement. The Victoria-Beckham comparison is worth examining properly because it gets cited regularly in discussions about what the Sussex commercial strategy could look like going forward, and the comparison is more instructive as a cautionary parallel than as an encouraging one. Victoria Beckham built a fashion label that achieved something specific and genuinely difficult. She earned critical respect within the fashion industry itself. Designers and editors took the work seriously on its own terms, separate from her celebrity. The brand won awards, dressed serious clients, and developed a design identity that had professional standing in a world that is notoriously resistant to celebrity fashion ventures. Even so, the brand operated as a financial black hole for years, not months, years. The income that kept it alive while it built its credibility, its wholesale relationships, and its distribution infrastructure came from David Beckham's commercial empire, football contracts, global sponsorship deals, commercial ventures, and eventually the Inter Miami investment. For an extended period, David's earnings were what subsidized Victoria's brand while it went through the slow process of earning the respect and the commercial relationships it needed to eventually become viable. That process was documented, acknowledged publicly, and sustained through losses that a less capitalized household simply could not have absorbed over the time frame required. The Sussex situation differs in every dimension that made the Beckham comparison survivable. The Sussex commercial operation has not achieved the equivalent of fashion industry critical respect in any of the categories it has attempted: the food brand, the podcast, the Netflix content, the lifestyle identity. The critical assessment of the work, the food content, the podcast, the Netflix material, has not produced the equivalent of the kind of sector standing that Victoria Beckham's fashion critics provided. There is no industry voice that treats the Sussex commercial output the way fashion reviewers treated Victoria Beckham's design work, and the capital cushion that the comparison would require, the equivalent of David Beckham's sustained, multi-year commercial income that could absorb significant annual losses while a brand built its credibility slowly, does not appear to exist in the Sussex financial picture at anything like the necessary scale. The Archewell Foundation deficit, the reported despair about as ever's soaring expansion costs, the absence of any announced major new commercial partnership since Netflix's departure, these are not the indicators of a household that has the financial architecture to absorb years of losses while a new brand builds credibility from scratch. The Beckham parallel, when examined at the level of detail that the comparison requires rather than at the level of the broad narrative, makes the Sussex trajectory look considerably harder rather than more reassuring. It is cited as an encouraging comparison. It is actually an illustration of how difficult the path is and how specific the conditions were that made it work. What the polling numbers and the web traffic data suggest, taken together and read alongside the other developments of the same period, is that the American consumer relationship that was supposed to underpin the entire commercial operation has been eroding across the same 6 months that saw the major commercial partnerships either end or contract significantly. These are not separate stories. They appear to be different measurements of the same underlying movement. The foundation was losing donor confidence and regulatory standing simultaneously. The brand was losing both web traffic and approval ratings in its primary market. The most significant corporate endorsement departed publicly and visibly. And the communication strategy, the People magazine volume, the continuous Instagram content, the spokesperson-prepared defenses placed in advance of potentially controversial moments, continued at the same pace and in the same form while all of that was happening beneath it. That is the specific picture the Newsweek numbers reveal when you read the polling and the web traffic together rather than separately. Not a bad quarter, not a rough patch that a well-managed news cycle and a sympathetic magazine cover can address. A directional trend across multiple independent measurements in the market that matters most to everything the post-royal Sussex commercial identity was built to serve. Whether April's figure of 61,500 American visitors to the website represents a floor or a continuation is the question the next quarterly data will answer. Whether a 13-point polling decline represents the bottom of the approval trajectory or an ongoing trend depends on what happens to the factors that appear to have driven it. Neither question has an obvious positive answer in the currently available evidence, and neither is answered by the communication strategy that has been running continuously throughout the period in which both measures have been declining. What do you make of the 13-point polling drop and the nearly halved American web traffic? Is this reversible with the current strategy? Or does the data suggest something more structural has shifted in how American audiences are relating to the Sussex commercial operation? Drop your honest take in the comments below. Subscribe to Palace Insider so you never miss what we cover next. And if this kind of data analysis is what brings you here, the like button is how we keep doing it. We will see you in the next one.